What comes to my mind when I hear the term toxic relationships is a kind of suffocating silence that is felt not just in relationship with somebody. It could be a romantic partner, it could be a parent, it could be a friend, it could be anybody.
Toxic relationships are not a one-way street. It's not necessary that it's only women who may find themselves in a toxic relationships. The other gender too can find itself in a toxic space within a relationship.
There is this double kind of betrayal happening. There is a constant betrayal of your needs, wants, desires, of your freedoms, of the very things that we take for granted as human beings by somebody else. But that betrayal also very complicatedly starts happening with your own self.
Things happen and we hear it, we read it and we carry on. But at some point, I think there has to be like a pause to understand. You are with me today to discuss toxic love. What are the avenues for people in terms of redressal? How do you identify when love is becoming toxic, and what stops Indian women from leaving toxic relationships? So stay with me, and also a quick reminder that a lot of exclusive episodes are simply on YouTube, Jyotsna Mohan, so please do click, share and subscribe to those episodes. And I'm quickly going to kickstart the conversation today with Kamna Chhibber. She is a clinical psychologist with Fortis Mental Health Care. And Reema, she is a relationship and trauma counselor. She's also an author. I think a lot of us just take it for granted. We listen to it and things happen and we hear it, we read it and we carry on. But at some point, I think there has to be like a pause to understand what is it. I mean, it's to me, it's not good enough to say कि ये तो हमेशा होता था. You know, women for centuries have been living in bad marriages, and what I really want to clarify before we move ahead is that although we're having this conversation and there have been these murders in terms of live-in relationships, but it's not just about married women or unmarried women, or the fact that this is a what are we doing to ourselves, copying these. This is a direct repercussion of copying these Western influences and staying in live-in relationships. My point is actually, for years and years we know what goes on behind the four walls of our married society, and yet nobody speaks about it. So kicking it off with either of you, when I say toxic relationship, really, what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
Typically, people tend to associate toxic relationships with the worst that they can imagine. And you assume that it is going to be just about violence in a relationship, which would make it toxic. I think people miss out that there are a lot of subtle signs which could indicate that there is toxicity within a relational space. And people need to start becoming more aware of those. Because unfortunately, when you are in that toxic space, the impact it is having on you is immense. You start doubting your own self, you start blaming your own self, you are unsure of how you are being within the relationship, and you start questioning your own worthiness as well. So it impacts your sense of self overall, can lead to a lot of mental health related concerns. Toxic relationships are not a one-way street. It's not necessary that it's only women who may find themselves in a toxic relationships. The other gender too can find itself in a toxic space within a relationship. It's not just about romantic relationships. It could be toxicity in the workplace, it could be in a friendship, it could be within the family milieu, it could be in any space, which is something which we need to keep in mind when we're talking about toxicity within relationships.
Relationships, actually, it's not just intimate relationships or the way we consider a relationship to be, that has, there are so many different ways that a relationship can be toxic. Reema?
What comes to my mind when I hear the term toxic relationships is a kind of suffocating silence that is felt not just in relationship with somebody. It could be a romantic partner, it could be a parent, it could be a friend, it could be anybody. But also this kind of suffocating silence that is very inwards, where there is a separation not just from the person who you are relating with, but also a separation with one's own innermost needs, wants, and feelings, where there is this double kind of betrayal happening. There is a constant betrayal of your needs, wants, desires, of your freedoms, of the very things that we take for granted as human beings by somebody else. But that betrayal also very complicatedly starts happening with your own self. where you are constantly second guessing who you are, what you want, what you desire. And there is this counter narrative to everything that one can feel that comes from the gut. I am not safe. I want to get out. I am not okay here. There's a counter narrative that builds up because of 20,000 reasons, where you are then telling yourself, no, it's okay. It's going to be all right. You have to keep trying. The body is just throwing up. It is just telling you, giving you 100,000 signs of, I am not okay. But your subconscious mind is silencing that inwards, and there is this silence outwards. It's a very, very scary place to be in. And without that kind of support, which really shakes you up from the roots up to say that, you know what, you are not okay, you have to get out, because that is how strong the generational, familial, cultural, social, religious storytelling around relationships is, that you suffer in love.
A, it's the conditioning. B, it's the lack of support as well, right, Kamna? That's a big factor in people being able to speak out.
I feel that what ends up happening when you find yourself in toxic relationship spaces is that there is a sense of isolation which can start coming in. Typically, when you're in a toxic relationship, whoever you are with in that space is going to try and create a scenario where you start believing that this is the only person who probably has either your best interest at heart, or is the one who can understand you the best or knows you the best. And a lot of times, because of the toxicity of that relationship, of fears, doubts, the kind of anger outbursts which happen because you may try and seek inputs, or you may try and converse on the outside, the need to keep on withdrawing and isolating the self keeps on increasing. And one does not realize that there is only one voice which is reverberating all around, and that is of that very person who is leading to that conditioning happening to you over a period of time. And you find yourself into an isolated space where there is no other voice which is reaching you. So you are just thinking of probably not of your own self, and you are just getting isolated. You're finding yourself in a position where you're not sure of what you're doing. You're probably not even being able to think of what are the solutions. And even when people are trying to reach out to you, there's a chance that you're not sharing what is going on because you may be either fearful, scared, anxious, worried about what the interpretations may be, or also worried about what the outcomes may be. What if the person with whom you're in that toxic space with recognizes what you're saying and doing, and that leads to some sort of a backlash? And you don't realize how much time goes by, and you don't even realize how much you have let go of your own self. And when people come out of these spaces, they themselves raise that question that I don't know how I stayed there. I don't know what happened to me. I don't even recognize my own self today.
For a person to identify that they are in a toxic space, how do they identify? What are the, what is it that they should be looking out for?
The one solid giveaway of you're in an unsafe, toxic space is when you find yourself really pushed into a corner, and where there is this outside noise around you by one person, or even maybe by more than two people, because a toxic dynamic can even exist in families, where there's one person who's trying to do something different, but there are two or three people constantly, coming down on them very heavily. Is that there is this kind of self-questioning that starts happening, where you question your very own sanity or your own version of reality. I think that is one of the surest signs to when you don't know, or when you're questioning yourself, is what I'm feeling true? Is what I'm feeling accurate? These kind of toxicities are not just located in the present dynamic, whatever that relationship is. They precede that dynamic by at least 15, 20 years. What do I mean? Toxic relationships happen when there is already a lack in either a family, a holdback in either a family, or a lack felt deep within a person, where they have not experienced steady, healthy affection, love, which is self-affirming. If you've never ever experienced, and with that you go out into the world, and you are a magnet for people who know how to exercise power in unhealthy ways. So the toxicity is not just here right now. It is in many, many cases generational. It already exists in the family, where they have grown up noticing relationships working in a certain way. Therefore, that is their normal. And you are not therefore able to recognize what's healthy from what is unhealthy.
Taking off from where Reema just stopped, when you're coming from those blinders, really, then how do you figure out what a trigger is?
There are certain ways in which toxicity will manifest, and it's important for you to be able to recognize some of these things. In that relationship which is toxic for you, perhaps the person is extremely dismissive or whatever it is that you say, think, or feel. Perhaps there is a situation where you get criticized for whatever are the expressions that you are sharing in a space that you're occupying with that person. Maybe you find yourself constantly occupying a defensive position in your interactions, in your engagements with that person. Maybe there are times that when you're trying to share your perspective, the person is just not willing to hear you out. Maybe there are experiences or situations where this is not happening, just the way Reema said, within the context of just one person, but it may be multiple members of a family which are enacting that same type of a behavior pattern with you. What you need to be able to notice is what is happening to your expressions, what is it generating in terms of a feeling state within you. It will start making you feel doubtful of your own self. It will start creating a lack of assuredness in the way in which you're conducting yourself. The work that you do, you may start seeking a lot of reassurance in that. When you're making decisions, you may find that you're being more hesitant than what you previously were. When you're trying to solve problems, you may find that you're not able to come up with solutions the way that you previously used. The kind of creativity that you had, the lateral thinking that you had, that has started going amiss. What may also be happening is it would be impacting your feeling states. Either you're staying extremely anxious, you're becoming more hypervigilant, extremely hypersensitive to whatever it is that is going on around you. You find yourself constantly on the vigil, looking out for signs which could indicate from the other person that there is going to be some sort of a reaction which could lead to a negative interaction happening. Or you may start seeing that, your mood stay a lot lower. You don't want to engage in things which you previously were liking, almost going into a space where you could feel the depressive kind of symptomatology. Or you may also find yourself in other situations being more irritable, more snappy, because you are so depleted and exhausted maintaining that constant vigil. These are the ways in which it would manifest for an individual.
To break out of that chain in a sense, what is the best redressal method?
When you're in therapy and you're counseling, and you as a therapist or a counselor are able to detect right away that this person is in a toxic space, there is this urge to pull them out, like physically pull them out, especially if you've experienced yourself something so painful. More often than not, what you can offer to other people, and also going back to your question of what is available to them, is in the beginning only like a relief of symptoms. And to be able to access that curtain that has fallen on you, where you are not able to recognize safety when it's there, where you're not able to recognize healthy love and appreciation when it's there, that needs to lift a little bit. And in my experience, I feel like sometimes it takes really awful things happening to people for them to be able to even get to that space where there is that flicker of recognition, and then they can step out and say, oh my God, what's happening? If you are used to, say, one way of work, or have a certain set of friends, and you have this one partner or maybe a parent who's toxic, if you are able to step out, for example, say even take a class where you're exposed to maybe 3 different other people or one teacher, suddenly you're in a space where you're seeing yourself. And that sometimes offers you that larger window to look at what's actually happening. Hopefully, when you are more outwards, you see more of your own situation, and then you can access help or ask for help, or then you can even start listening to other people who are saying something to you. It requires a whole chain of events to happen for somebody to get into that space where they can then finally, access help. And more often than not, that it doesn't happen, and there's no one way where you can give people like a list, do this, and this will happen, unfortunately, at least in my experience.
What are the ways of extending helping hands?
I think it's important to split it up into 2 parts, perhaps. What you can do if you're in the initial stages of a relationship is very different from what you do when you're entrenched in that relationship more fully. What resources you'll have available will be completely different from within you as well as from the outside in both those scenarios. If you're someone who's in a newish relationship where you have started recognizing these patterns, I think what's most important is learning to talk about it. Being able to share that experience, starting with the closest confidants that you've always had, is extremely important. The mistake a lot of times people make is that because they have chosen someone or they are with someone, they hesitate in being able to talk about what their experiences are, and they feel that they may be judged. They want to protect that relationship, and in that they end up making a mistake. It's very critical that if you are noticing that you are in a space where you can experience any of the things that, Reema was highlighting or I was highlighting, then choose to talk, share what is happening. If you are feeling that doubt, it's better to discuss it and try and understand from someone who has that outsider's perspective whether this could be something which is not good for you. The second aspect is that learning to hold on to our own selves is a crucial, critical life skill that we all need to have in place. It's harder for someone else to be able to penetrate that, to create any sort of cracks in that space. And I think when you start noticing that someone is being toxic around you, try and challenge it. My suggestion would not be just, run away from that relationship entirely. Now, this can happen only if you're in the initial stages of a relationship. But if you find yourself in a space where you've been in that relationship for a longitudinal period of time, it's going to be harder to do this, because somewhere those belief systems would have gotten strengthened within your own mind, in your own psyche, that you're probably not good enough, that maybe you don't know how to operate in relationships, that you cannot take care of things, whatever are the complaints that are coming towards you, or the diatribes which are reaching you in that context. In that situation, I think seeking out help is something which is very important. And the starting point has to be to look at your well-being. There is nothing more important than you as an individual. Maintaining that support system, Jyotsna, which you were highlighting, that, somewhere the supports tend to disappear. Maintaining those is of critical importance. There is just no way to operate without a support system, and you need to find it wherever you can find it. Wherever you can find it, hold on to it.
There are two things I've noticed systemically that happen in our cultures and society that sort of lead to you getting into these spaces in the first place. One is that it is very hard for us to allow ourselves to change our mind. To say that, I like this person, but now I'm in trouble. I do not like this relationship anymore. I do not like this space anymore. I do not like this workspace anymore. Let me get out. So there is a very entrenched, larger narrative that says you cannot change your mind. The second is this complete dismissal of people, especially women, being allowed to have a space of their own. Something that is their own identity, something that belongs only to them, either creatively or intellectually or passionately. Because if we don't have these two things, the ability or the acceptance to be able to change our mind and something that belongs only to ourselves, our sense of self is already compromised. These two things that I mentioned, even for men, it's really hard for them to also change their minds about their work, about their, relationships, about something that they've chosen, and they themselves end up being this stiff, hard thing. And then, of course, that violence and aggression goes on to other things, that if I am not allowed to do X, Y, Z, or even if I'm allowed to do X, Y, Z, I still have this image to uphold of how a man should be. That is violence both inside out, and that will come out, spill out.
Somewhere when you are coming from an environment where you have internalized this behavioral pattern, it's become such an integral part of you that it is quite likely that it's not being challenged by other people around you often enough or strongly enough, which would lead you to question where you're coming from. And it's very possible that it's only at much later stages in your life, when you're entering into more intimate spaces where people have a larger interface with you at a more regular frequency, that those kind of behavioral patterns get manifested in a much larger way, and that's where it starts becoming evident. In your regular day-to-day relationships with people on the outside, you're bringing only a small part of yourself, right? It's not coming out in a very big way. So you may not be getting that feedback in such a large manner to say that maybe you're being toxic. So what is it that you can really do to be able to identify that are there certain behavioral patterns, certain ways in which I tend to do or react to situations which could indicate that I can potentially be toxic? Is your way of responding to people more passive aggressive. Things like sarcasm, being extremely dismissive of others, come through that passive aggressiveness, which we miss out on. So you need to start thinking of, am I reflecting some of these behaviors? Do I find myself being manipulative in situations? Do I find myself actively trying to hide or, suppress certain pieces of information about my own self, not allowing myself to fully express who I am? If I'm not being able to be my whole authentic self, there's something that I'm trying to hide. Why am I hiding that? That question you need to start raising within your own self to be able to ask that, am I trying to hide something which is bad? Or am I trying to hide something because I'm scared that I may get judged? Am I trying to hide something because I'm feeling anxious? What is it that is causing me to create that mechanism of operating in a certain space? You need to start asking yourself those questions. And it is possible that you may have seen that maintaining long-term relationships have not been that easy for you. Of the other ways in which it may be getting communicated to you, that you could perhaps be somewhere veering towards that toxic side of things. If you become aware of these patterns, you can also bring about a change.
If someone's pointing out something about your action, your behavior, or they're just sharing something, and you suddenly feel inside you that yourself is being attacked, that you're being questioned, that you're being minimized, and you react either with withholding love and affection and silence, which is passive aggression, or you come up very strongly with a very huge big body, and then you're being very, very, physically aggressive, then it's something's going on in your sense of self that requires you to constantly be protecting yourself, which happens through minimizing others, shooting down others, scaring them, and that is a short giveaway. If you can't hear things about yourself without, oh, maybe there's something in what this person's saying, that's like one of the easiest ways to identify that.
One of the biggest aspects is gaslighting. I think another person has also written about the fact that, where does that leave the enablers? They may be silent, but they are enabling by, not letting people come out, or, not encouraging somebody to come out and speak.
I think, if there are mindsets in a family or in a relationship where you view the world as black and white, where your narrative is the only narrative, gaslighting is going to happen, because your narrative is the one that you want to uphold. And you will shoot down everybody else's version of whatever reality is happening. And it's so hard to bring about self-awareness if you're the one who's doing gaslighting. But if someone's on the other side and they're constantly noticing this pattern in people, or maybe a person, where the minute they open their mouth to share their truth, they're told that you're imagining this, or you're mad, or this is not true, or this is not what actually happened, or explanations keep changing. Or, I said this because I was angry, I love you, or, I said this because I was trying to protect you. But in all of this, talking, your truth never gets acknowledged. And that leads to this sense of dissonance and unease, where you're literally, there's this word in Urdu, parpadahat. You feel that. You're like, you're anxious all the time. So I think the only way to sort of start that process where you're even able to call out gaslighting, challenge it, get out of it, is to be in touch with your body. It's like our biggest support system. If it's saying something to you, pay attention to it.
Has social media complicated matters even more? This urgency, this need, this desperation to show everything is hunky-dory.
Nothing has just one side to it, no. There are both the sides. There's the good, there's the bad, and there's the ugly also. All three aspects associated with it. It has the good, it's really helped people connect, and it's brought to the forefront a lot more information, knowledge exchange, all of that. It's become bad in the way that, we're hooked onto it all the time. There is no time for digital detox. There are constant comparisons, there's a constant need to put out everything that is good and fabulous about our lives, and it somewhere prevents people from being able to speak about the challenges, the problems, the negatives that happen around them or with them. I think what's most important is that each and every one of us has a responsibility to start taking some accountability for what we're doing, right? Social media is created by us, and it's up to us what is the messaging that we are putting across on all of these platforms.
What I'm also noticing, especially in the younger people, is that if anybody says something that you do not like, or if anybody also holds you accountable, or if anybody says, you know what, it's not okay to just ghost me just like that without giving an explanation, you know, I'm a human being, I have dignity, you just turn around and say, oh, they're being so toxic. So there's also this throwing around of terminology that is happening in addition to everything that Kamna said, is that is very scary.
Thanks both of you for,
Thank you. No, thank you so much. It was fabulous listening to Kamna. Thank you.